to MythVision podcast. Does Jesus love marriage? Well, the title's kind of triggering, isn't it? He loves some eunuchs, that's for sure, and we know that. I think I hear someone in the background. I'm looking forward to this live stream. Dr. Jennifer Bird has written an amazing book. I pinned that at the top of the comments section. We're going to have a deep dive conversation. And with that being said, let's not waste any time. Dr. Jennifer Bird, welcome back to MythVision.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Derek, for having me back.
Thank you.
Looking forward to this talk for, since we scheduled it.
Well, it's long overdue. The book has been out for what, 4 months now, I'd say?
It's actually a kind of a bit of a joke. Technically, it was the end of January. I don't know, but it was in print on Halloween. So go figure. Yeah. So anyway, it's officially out now. That's what we know, but it's been in people's hands for several months. Yeah.
Well, if you're watching, I have a link in the description. Of course, I have affiliate links. So if you ever buy books and stuff and you want to do that and help MythVision grow, you can always go and shop on Amazon through any of the links that I have in the description, and they credit us. But either way, whatever you do, you can also go to Dr. Bird's website. You just Google Dr. Jennifer Bird, and I promise you'll see her websites there. The links are in the description of this video as well. But marriage in the Bible, what does the text say? I love the title. As we were talking about before I hit live, I want to know what the text, what is the original context of the author? And you do a great job getting into chapter 3, where you're like, first of all, Christians love to take this and use this marriage thing as a gotcha, and you can't divorce ever. And Jesus taught this idea about marriage with so many things they aren't aware of that you are rolling out the carpet on. But contextualizing Jesus in a rabbinic debate format really blew my mind, and it made me enjoy the book even more, because you also entertain various possibilities of hyperbole or literalistic ideas of what's going on. What does Jesus mean? How do we understand this? And anyway, you have a presentation, I'm sure, but is there anything before we get to that you'd like to cover?
Oh dear. No, the thing I will say is a lot of people are trying to have this conversation about what Jesus means and what he's saying, and is divorce okay or not, and what do they mean by adult, what do they mean by this, and X, Y, and Z. And what I'm saying that's new that you're not going to get from other scholars is to pay attention to what Jesus is implying about the role of sex in all of this. That's the part that I'm most interested in, because he is perpetuating very ancient ideas about bodies and sex, and that sex is what a man does to a woman to claim her, to mark his territory. Like, to me, that's you're not going to hear that in a sermon for sure, but no other scholars publish that. You know what I mean? Like, let's take this part seriously, because that is what is informing people to this day, right? In terms of being really concerned about the way people are having sex and to what end. Right.
You are very, very transparent, bold, blunt, and you make people who are reading it feel comfortable even reading it. Because sometimes I'm sure some people are like, I don't really know. I've seen, I can't remember the name of podcast, but they'll have girls that are OnlyFans girls, or other girls who aren't putting themselves out there like that are free birds, let's call them, and they're flying and they're enjoying their lives with several partners as they go along. And in these podcasts by more conservative hosts, you can tell they frown upon them. They talk about their quality. Well, is that all you have to offer? These kinds of things, as if sex is the only thing that they have to offer. And a lot of times I heard one of them say, and I'm giving examples so people get comfortable right now. We're going to be diving into some difficult stuff, but also hopefully everybody's 18 and older and you can handle these conversations. Is the one guy, the girl was talking about how come guys can do all this with all these girls and they get praised, and the girl does this and she becomes marked as a pariah, a negative, derogatory slander. And the guy, who obviously was trying to make sense of this, said, well, isn't it easier for women to get laid than it is for a man? And the effort that men have to put into to try and get laid is evidence that it's actually an accomplishment, an achievement. And you see where I'm going with this? So like he's an apologist for why we should consider these women in a negative way and men who accomplish these things in a positive light.
I
The
might be
same
puking.
thing keeps going,
I
right?
might be puking here in a moment.
It's you know what I'm saying though, like you've heard it.
Though, it's just unbelievable that people say these things out loud.
There's some people I'm shocked that they're even saying some of the stuff they do say, and it's like,
Yeah.
wow. But
Mhm.
we're
The double
combating,
standards, right? The double standards just they're painful, right? Today,
right,
but they're in the scriptures too. Like the texts themselves set people up to think that way,
right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
property. Women are property
Mhm.
in the Bible. The way that they're
Right.
described, and it's always men who are doing the talking about this. And this is
Right.
there's so many things to factor in that this book I've never considered. And you're the first person who brought it to my attention. Marriage is a sex act. It's a
It is.
sex thing, and I'm like, I thought it was when you like go down there and then the priest comes up and he starts, I do, and then I do, and then you say your little things and then you kiss. And that's marriage. And then the ceremony's over and now you're married. It's like,
Right, right.
actually,
No.
that's not what marriage is. Anyway, I'm taking your
It's fine. No, it's fine. Yeah. I mean, it's great to have someone else talk about what you're doing. Like it's not just me who's interested in this. Like even, like Derek Lambert is interested in this too. That's great.
well, it's biblical and I want to understand it. And then
Yeah.
people who
Yeah.
are like, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
You're giving them
Yeah.
permission, as your first book, permission granted, to
Mhm,
say,
mhm,
I don't agree with Jesus on that.
mhm.
I hope even Christians can do this, but
Right, right. And it is, and any Christians who are like it is scary to question what's attributed to Jesus or to raise a question about whether or not you agree with him or that you're comfortable with that or interrogating like the fact that I'm saying in that chapter, right? I'm saying that um Jesus has a pretty unhealthy view of marriage, right? I'm saying I don't say it in those words. I say it differently, but over and over, right? He is playing along with the ancient ideas. He's playing along with what the Hebrew Bible sets him up to think and believe. It's his tradition. Of course he is, right? But
mm,
people spend a lot of time talking about, the laws or this and that. And I want to get into what the implications for people are. What's behind this way of thinking about men and women bodies, this relationship we call marriage.
I want to get into that. I just want to give a
Yeah,
shout
yeah.
out to one of my top fans, the Mount Calvary Way. Thank you for being a new fan of MythVision podcast. MythVision hates Christianity and loves to just disingenuously misrepresent Christ.
Oh,
I can't wait for you to watch and see how we do that from the text itself today so that you can be in flat denial of what your own Bible teaches. Hallelujah. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much, everybody in the chat, for being here. Hit the like button. Let's have some fun.
let's do
Dr.
it.
Bird, I'm following your lead.
Okay. We're not
And
doing a fun intro like video thing.
do you want me to? I haven't done one in I got one.
I mean, it's like half the fun of coming besides talking to you is your intros.
Okay. I've got one and it's been a minute, but the last time someone brought up that old Western Tombstone movie, which I really enjoyed, it was super.
It was a good one. Yeah.
I'm your Huckleberry. Let's play for blood. So I figure why not?
Let's just please.
Okay. I'm following you.
Okay.
Don't any of you have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.
Thank you. I just it helps me to kind of be like, okay, we're doing this now. Okay.
It's official.
It's official now. Okay. Now we can start.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, so, I don't know if you actually talk with each of your guests to talk through what you're going to call it or whatever, what you're going to put on the thumbnail and all of that. But you and I did talk about it, and I was trying to was trying to steer you in a different direction. And of course you went with what you did. And there's this part of me that cringes because I'm like, I want people to know what to expect. And I'm not sure if I'm going to give them what they think they're going to get. And that's okay. And we'll talk it all out and it's fine. But, that kind of happens because I understand what you're trying to do. Right. Like,
I guess if we're being honest and fair, the title is sensational and maybe even a bit much. What we are doing or attempting to do with the title is contrast first of all, what is marriage so that you can understand that contextually.
Right.
But then also to go, why did he even bring up eunuchs? Like why are these people favored?
Yeah.
And you're going to see that in the text. He prefers that. So I'm not saying he doesn't say marriage is an institution in antiquity, in his own antiquity. Sure. So he's like, I'm not here to change that, but if you can do this thing, even better. So
well, and but also from my perspective, most Christians, right? This is their guy, right? Jesus is your guy, and we're not taking him seriously on marriage, the things that he does say about marriage. And the implications behind it all. People are not taking that seriously. I want you to take it seriously. Like more than anything else. Let's just this.
I love this. And just to give myself a little credit, I didn't mean it. I guess you could say I didn't mean it hyperbolic, but you know how Christians love to see the Jacob I loved, Esau I hated passage, and they go, well, he didn't hate him. It's just he more liked. Well, okay, then Jesus didn't hate marriage, but he really loves eunuchs. So let's just bring the cat out of the bag here.
Okay. Well, I think you could potentially say he might actually hate marriage. I think it's possible. Anyway, that isn't where I'm trying to go, but I think there's room for that. So from my perspective, right, what is it that why do I do all of this stuff, right? Like I'm interested in getting people to take the Bible more seriously than they ever have before. That's kind of where the shorthand here, right? Like, no, let's take it seriously. Let's see what it does say. See what it doesn't say. I didn't read the super chat you shared, but
I'm just giving it. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That was Jay from Hunter Biden's laptops. He's a friend of mine.
Nice. Yes. Yeah. He's yeah.
Stop misrepresenting Christianity. Well, current Christians may actually find things they're going to disagree with, but she's going back to the source, and then they might find some overlap and agree with some of the things she says about this. So sorry.
Yeah, you never know. So that is, the whole endeavor of looking at what does the Bible say about marriage, right? That's an endeavor. It took quite a bit of time, and I enjoyed the endeavor. But it's kind of one of those. If I wanted to give someone like one or two sound bites, like I'm trying to think, well, what Jesus actually says is not taken seriously. It just isn't. So per your thumbnail, right? We'll start out here and see where it goes, right? See where our conversation goes. So I do want to this is going to be fairly brief, but just to remind people or let people know if you don't know already, right? Very briefly, we're going to look at the things that Jesus is attributed with saying. And if you believe that Jesus said them all, or if you just want to talk about the writer is depicting him this way, it doesn't matter to me which way you want to think about that. I just think that people need to be more clear about, Yeah. So what he does say about marriage, and then this passage about eunuchs, which I think we're going to have to just talk about. Oh, Hunter Biden's comment about eunuchs. Yes. The script or whatever that was the captionings, they thought I was talking about a computer language, not a body. Yeah. Okay. So yes, eunuchs. So this may be news to some people. This might just be review, but leave your family to follow me, right? Like it is okay to leave your parents, your children, your spouse to follow me. Like that's okay. That's Luke chapter 18, verses 28 to 30. And I remember having a conversation when I was early in I just started on Twitter like many years ago, and this young woman was engaging. She's engaging me. She said, "I wouldn't mind if my husband left me to follow Jesus." She means that. I know that she means that, but I bet she doesn't have a mortgage or children yet. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Okay. Anyway, so
Especially if there's no income coming in by doing that. So that's a different question to
exactly.
even
Exactly. Right. Marriage is a hindrance. So there's a passage, right, in Luke chapter 20, verses 34 and 35, where he's talking about those who, the people of this age, give in marriage, are married and given marriage. But those worthy of, I changed the page here, but those worthy of the resurrection do not marry. Like this is a hindrance to being in the kingdom of God.
Mm.
What the hell? Like, we
It
don't take.
reminds me of that passage where what you're talking about, where the rabbis are trying to get Jesus. Who will he be married to in the resurrection kind
We're
of
getting
thing?
to that. Yes, we're getting
Okay,
to that.
sorry.
No, that's fine. That's the next one, right? Yes, they pose it's the Sadducees, because the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. And so they're posing that question. They're like, yeah, a man takes a woman, marries a woman, and dies without giving her children. And so she, each of his 6 brothers, right? That poor woman. And we don't pause to be sorry for her. We're just too focused on what Jesus is going to say about it, right? Like, good grief, these bodies as pawns in this game, right? No, let's be a little more sensitive to that, please. Yeah, and so they ask, to whom does she belong in the resurrection? And he doesn't pause to say, and maybe we should do away with that practice. Right? That's
Right.
not the point of the exchange, but the reality is, from this perspective, then Jesus is giving 2 thumbs up to levirate marriage.
Right.
Okay, I mean, I hope your younger brothers are just as good looking as you, Derek, because if Ryan's got to marry one of them, no, she wouldn't have to, because you've already given her children. Never mind.
That's true. It's
But like
already official.
seriously, people, Jesus is endorsing levirate marriage. Can we please take a minute to wrap
Think
our
about
minds
that.
around this? Yes, I don't want to move on too quick here, right? What Jesus does endorse, many times we've said we're not okay with that anymore, and so it's just stunning to me. Okay,
Just to pause on that, to emphasize something for those who may not know levirate marriage,
Oh,
just to
sorry.
emphasize something that I think is important. Thinking of the woman in the situation, is the law does not care about her feelings about the next brother. The law says she will, right, carry off the offspring in the name of the original brother that was with her.
Right. I'm
And
sorry.
so it doesn't matter. Your point, I think, if it went over anyone's head, was, if your brother is this not so good looking, not so hygienic, not so, just being silly here, but I'm being serious. Imagine you had someone who's just dirty, filthy. You have no choice by the law but to marry that brother, to continue the lineage, etc., in his name.
Yeah. And in Genesis 38, that's the one story that we have from the Hebrew Bible that kind of enacts that law. I mean, the women don't ever have a voice anyway, even in the initial, right? She's purchased, from her family, and Judah gives her to his oldest son. What's interesting to me is that in Genesis, Judah is saying to the second son, after the first one dies, go and perform the brother-in-law duty to her. He's not even talking about it in terms of marriage. He doesn't say, go take your sister-in-law, go take her as your own, and have children. No, it's just go have sex with her to give her children. Like, it's unbelievable to me how it's talked about so bluntly, so it may have evolved by the first century. Sure, may have evolved that they're not talking about it in those terms, but it's still a practice, and it's still focused on women's bodies as, there for men. Predominantly, their role is as baby makers, and so forth and so on. That's levirate marriage, is giving the oldest son children through whom the inheritance is passed along, and all those kinds of things, right? So over and over again, we have messages from the Christian Bible, both primary testaments, messages about women as primarily here to produce children, and it's even, Jesus isn't taking a moment to correct that, right? So it's in there as an example. I don't think that, I'm not trying to say that I think he was down, like he was thrilled about it, but he did it, but it wasn't a part of the thing that they were trying to address. And he didn't feel the need, or the person writing Jesus's story down didn't feel the need to say, maybe we should stop this one. I
Right.
think that's worth thinking about, right?
It's like the same thing with slavery. That Jesus uses slavery in his
Yes.
parables,
Yes.
in his teachings, and
Yes.
never condemns the act or even though what I love about, I can't remember the scholar, Jennifer,
Um,
another Jennifer.
Glancy.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, probably. I think it is
Mhm,
Glancy.
mhm.
Something about Jennifers. I'm telling you, they're just smart people. Is she points out Jesus does this over and over, and this is a problem for Christians because there were Essenes that literally spoke as if it was a crime against humanity. So he could have gone on record. It's not like it was completely foreign and no one had ever, as individuals, spoken against the
Practice.
situation of slavery, the practice of slavery. He could have. He didn't. Well, that's a huge problem.
It is. It
Huge.
ought to be. It ought to be considered a problem. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Well, just because he didn't comment on it doesn't mean he didn't, well, guess what, folks? You don't get to play it both ways, right?
He does comment
Either
on it,
these yeah,
and it's
right?
in pro, just
He
like left, right.
uses it.
Yeah.
Yes, he uses it and very much it diminishes the humanity of these bridesmaids or whatever, their virgins or all the different stories that he's using enslaved people to talk about the kingdom of heaven or whatever. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's concerning to me. And so the one that is the claim that is coming from Jesus in Matthew 19 is the one that's closest to saying something positive about marriage. In other words, divorce is not a good idea. So that in a sense is a back end way of saying stay married. That isn't necessarily the same thing as saying positive things about marriage, right?
Right.
I mean, I think that's important to note.
Well,
Okay.
you're already in it. Damn it. Right.
Yeah. So the thing is, the passage, I actually kind of just want to read the whole passage if that's okay, because it's people want to come in and say all kinds of things about it, but what is it? So from my perspective, again, this is the thing that's new, right? That I'm
Mhm.
offering to this whole exchange or way of thinking about this passage. Pay attention to what he is then saying about bodies and sex. And what's interesting about this this focus that I'm trying to ask, I ask my readers to think about it. I ask my students to think about it. Is Oh, I lost my train of thought, Derek. That is hilarious.
Ignore the super chats,
I know
please.
it's hard.
We will give them praise here in a minute. I just want you, because I know that can be distracting.
A little bit, but
But you want your students and your readers to
take
follow along.
seriously. Mhm.
Yeah.
Take seriously what's being said about the role of sex in this whole thing about marriage, right?
Right.
We don't, biblically speaking, this is when biblically speaking, people aren't giving advice on marriage. They're only talking about sex. So even Jesus and Paul, like the only time they're referring to marriage is talking about sex. And that is, I think, a big piece of the problem today, why so many people of faith are kind of hung up on the way people are going to be having sex. If we let, and I have air quotes here for those who are just listening and not watching, if we let people, two men, two women, get married, then what kind of sex are they going to be having? As if it's anyone's business, right?
Mm.
But biblically speaking, that's all people are talking about. I mean, chapter 1 Corinthians 7 is a chapter where Paul is addressing, whether or not married couples should abstain from having sex. And then if you divorce, should you remarry? And the whole thing is about the issue of sex, the whole chapter. I mean, he's talking about different widows and virgins and all this stuff. And the issue is around your lack of self-control, or having self-control. And it's just, it's a little bit mind-numbing, to be honest, that how much this is teaching people to think this way still, right? To think about. That's my other thought, really quick before I forget.
Yeah.
When I remember standing in front of students for the first time, trying to invite them to consider talking about not trying to get them to consider separating marriage and sex. because they were so well trained on this idea of no sex before marriage, that when you're talking about procreating, then of course you're talking about marriage. But that's not true. That isn't true. We're putting that on it because we've been taught to think that way. And so truly, to get someone to think about or talk about sex in any kind of normal, comfortable way outside of marriage, this is almost impossible with like 90% of the Christians on the planet, to get them to talk about sex in a healthy way, comfortable way, and to say, we're not talking about marriage here. We're just talking about sex. And it's okay that there are people having sex and they aren't married. Like, that step alone is a hard one to get most people who read the Bible to
Absolutely
be okay with.
It's interesting what you've said so far. I think is very interesting about sex and marriage. You have a really well said spot in your book. I'm going to read it here and share the screen for a second, and I'm just going to bounce back to your presentation.
Oh, sure.
We need to air out this nugget as well. Is it true that the primary defining element of a marriage today is having sex together? Does it not matter that you build lives and families together and network of friends, combine your resources, share joys and sorrows alike, celebrate and mourn together? Are these things not even more important in terms of the bonds you create than whether or not you climax together? I love that statement. I'm going to come back to your side here, but I love that statement because, you know, what is the most valuable part of marriage? In my experience, after 17 years, it is that bond. It is that I have someone I trust, that I can rely, that I have a partner who has my back, my best interest, that I could share moments with, that I can talk to when I'm down, that I can smile with when things are going good. Like, that is the most important. One additional plus is that I'm attracted to her.
Right. Yeah.
And that's even more fun when you add everything up. But yeah. Anyway.
It's not what, thank you. I actually, in my mind, I was like, I wonder if I'm going to get to ask Derek that, like, what are the top
I'm just
5
laying
things?
it out there.
It's great. I appreciate it. But that's, and thank you for that. That is, for that quote, sharing that quote. Okay. So here's the thing. Jesus doesn't ever say something positive about marriage. He is not depicted ever saying something positive about marriage. Can we just say that a few more times? All, like, maybe make a chant out of it. Jesus is not depicted being positive about marriage.
Wow
is right. I mean, this is not a marriage-friendly guy. He's not a family-friendly guy. Like, Jesus is not your guy for family values. Can we please take that more seriously?
Yeah. But what about the what about all the conservatives who are demanding that we want to keep the what do they call it, the
biblical marriage? No, what?
Yeah, biblical traditional household, right? Like, anyway, I'm just throwing that out there because there's a lot of fundamentalists who use the Bible to try and justify what they think a household's supposed to look like, when Jesus himself is doing something radically different, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And there's biblical text to endorse man is the head of the household, and the woman is, barefoot pregnant. That's not fair. The woman is, staying at home and is having children and is taking care of the house. Like, sure, that's biblical for sure. And it's appalling that you would expect every single couple to want to fall into that role, those two roles. That might work for some, but it does not work for all.
Right.
And that is that's when it's a problem, when you think that it has to be this one way. But yeah, so I think, like the chapter 3 on Matthew 19, and then chapter 7 on Newer Testament passage, other Newer Testament references, like those two, in my opinion, in a sense, is all a Christian actually really needs to read, because this conversation today, this is a political conversation. This is a personal issue. This is religious. It's all the things. It affects everybody, even if you are not, a gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender person. It does affect you, because it's affecting the people you know and love. And so, when people say they want a biblical marriage, or they want to only endorse a biblical marriage, they really don't know what the Bible says, because I think they mean they want it to be loving. They want to have each other's backs. They want to be grounded in in their faith and in what God has taught them to in terms of loving each other. And I think they mean something beautiful. But then they also think that the Bible says, that it's only between a man and a woman. They think it says all these things, but it doesn't say all those things. And then you're also missing what your main guy is saying. So
what I love about what you just said is, and I'm sure you're going to get what I'm saying, and most of the audience will, is they have derailed from the biblical meaning. They might cherry pick certain ideas they like, but they've really derailed from the context of the scripture and have kind of formulated their own version of a Christian life based on a model of Christ they have in their head, which is nothing like the text is saying, based on a God in their head that is arguably nothing like we could point to the text is saying, without having some of the outdated, I would say, or dated is same thing, concepts about God, apocalypticism, the asceticism of philosophy of the day, et cetera, like they mean well and they have good intentions, but they don't have anything remotely to the biblical or textual image that's being painted.
Right. Exactly. There is no.
So why do they need it? Why do they need the Bible in order to, anyway?
No, I know. And I know, the answer to that too. Like it's, people have given it authority. People have given it power over them because they believe that it is, descended from heaven, straight from God, like what God wants for them. If I had $1 for every time a student said to me, that the Bible is what God wants us to know and learn and all these things, I'm like, is it? But is it really? I know why you think that. Let's talk about that. Okay, now I see. This is why I had to have the PowerPoint, because I get off on all these random tangents. So is it okay to so this is the thing I want to talk about the eunuchs. Although I have to be honest, I really only read one article talking about eunuchs in the first century, and it was a great article, and I actually have it linked on my website. If anyone wants to go read it, it's Jesus, the post-gender Jesus.
Trigger warning.
I know, and it's a great article, and he has all kinds of primary sources referenced, which is why I think it's a great article. So you can go find the other, primary sources if you want to read all about it. So that was just to heads up, like I am not an expert on eunuchs. I just was trying to understand a little bit better this passage in Matthew 19. So here's the thing. Jesus does say, he lists 3 ways that people become eunuchs. And so just so we're clear, in case somebody doesn't know, being a eunuch means that you are a male in body. You have a penis and testicles, and you have at least the testicles removed. Sometimes it's the whole
package.
Yep. But so I'm touring with just reading the passage or just.
You should. I think you should, because he literally it's in one passage, tells you all 3 options.
It's not long. Yeah. And, so here's the thing here. The premise is he is approached by Pharisees, and they're asking him about divorce. And so the fact that people say this is one of the 4 passages that defines biblical marriage is kind of funny to me, because it's not talking about marriage. It's talking about whether or not for which reason is Jesus okay with divorce. That's what they're saying. They're asking him. This is a debate that has been going on for at least 200 years before Jesus hits the scene. So the first couple exchanges back and forth is a well-worn debate, and he's just showing that he knows the debate. They're asking him which option he prefers, and then he lays on some stuff in verse 9. And so verse 9 is not included in the passage that people quote for biblical marriage. It's just 4 through 6 that people quote, and that isn't Jesus. Those aren't Jesus's words. Those are rabbis' words and ways of engaging Genesis chapters 1 and 2. And the stuff that Jesus says that's new is in verse 9 and verse 12. And that is not brought into the conversation about marriage for Christians. Why not?
Right. Yeah, it gets ignored, completely
It
ignored,
gets
or
ignored.
it's irrelevant to what they're trying to do. They have this kind of agenda in their mind
Right.
and how they're reading it. And those two schools mainly that were floating around was Hillel and Shammai. You were
Mhm.
talking
Mhm.
in your book, you write about this just for those who are interested. It seems you have a good friend as well, a new
Aw.
top fan. She doesn't know how
Ooh.
to interpret scripture. She is ridiculous. She
Mm.
doesn't.
Yeah, that's
So
fun.
you have
That's
a
fun.
best friend too.
I do. I have a new fan.
Yay!
Did Jesus really mean pluck your eye out? She's a professor. She can't speak in full sentences.
Well, you get excited like me,
I
so
do. I do get excited.
we do
I'm
this,
having
but I want to defend you for a second and just say,
Mm.
my friend, read her book because she goes into the hyperbole of much of this, and
do.
at least she interprets it as hyperbole there.
Yeah.
But you also cover how, in this context, it would be kind of ridiculous to think he means hyperbole when he's talking about eunuchs.
Right.
Anyway, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, thank you for that. I do. I start out this chapter 3, talking about hyperbole and how it usually just is, right. Did he mean pluck your eye out? Did he mean cut your right hand off? Interestingly enough, that is actually part of the problem, is that so many people don't know that that's hyperbole. And there was actually an episode in Grey's Anatomy where a guy tries to cut his masturbating hand off because he can't stop. He feels guilty for the pleasure, and he feels like his right hand is causing him to sin, so he needs to cut it off. Like, that doesn't make it to Grey's Anatomy unless there's a reason for it to make it to Grey's Anatomy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
People do not get that it is. And so back to Jennifer's comment, though, people don't get its hyperbole, and they take this comment about divorce to heart. They say he's saying no to divorce. Well, which is it? Are we going to say it's hyperbole, or like the thing about divorce, right?
Right.
Is it hyperbole or isn't it not? And do we get to just anyway? So let me just read the passage.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Some Pharisees came to him, and to test him, they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his woman," my English says wife, "for any cause?" He answered, "Have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning, quote, made the male and female, end quote?" That's from Genesis 1:27. And said, for quote, "For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his woman," my English says wife, "and the two shall become one flesh," end quote. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. So many things I want to say about that. I'm going to just keep reading, though. They said to him, "Why then did Moses?" I mean, can we? So like, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Like,
Can I show you something?
yeah, that's right.
What God, I'm
Uh-huh.
reading, what God has joined together, down here with the Roman numeral. My wife has the other half of the verse.
I know.
We got this way back, years back.
Right.
So
Right.
anyway,
No, I mean, and it's anyway, it's one thing to say that is your belief, but the pain and the way that becomes oppressive in terms of preventing people from being honest about this relationship is done, or
Right.
this relationship is abusive, or all of the other things about this, right? So when you say that two people having sex, they're now joined together for all eternity, like, that is incredibly, actually, it's a form of like, it's control and abuse. Anyway, okay. Verse 7, they said to him, "Then why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her?" He said, "It's because you were hard-hearted that Moses allowed you to divorce your women," my English says wives, "but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you," and here's how he starts ratcheting things up, right? He takes the Jewish law and he ratchets it up, right? Over and over again. "Whoever divorces his woman," my English says wife, "except for unchastity, and marries another commits adultery." This is, sure, hyperbole, sure, but it is the reason that the church says no divorce. So which is it, right? Catholics in particular are really stringent about it, but most of the Protestants I grew up with, right? Like, divorce is a sin. Divorce is wrong. Don't get divorced. So can we talk about the why, right? That was what this other piece, right? But why? Why is it a problem? And it's a problem not because, back to you and Ryan, I'm not trying to wish anything negative, ill on you all, but like, if if that were to happen, it would be awful. It would be devastating, and it's hard for the children. It pulls families apart, right? You love members of each other's families, and like to lose all that, like that's why it's a problem, right? And in the context, and people will say this, well, Jesus was also potentially protecting women, right? Because if men, and this was part of the debate, right? If men were divorcing their women because they're a lousy cook, and we have textual evidence, even if they're being sarcastic, we have textual evidence that says that sometimes that's what was happening, right? Like just for random, stupid reasons, men could divorce and women had no say in it, right? So, people are saying, well, what if he's trying to protect the women? Because that's just being too flippant about it. The man is going to be okay, but she is out, like she's stranded, and that's awful. And I think there's an element that I think that's a fair comment to make, but
Right.
that's not what's really going on that I care about. What I care about is why this is a problem. And he's saying this is all about sex. Marriage is defined by sex. A man takes a woman, does sex to her, because that's how it's talked about. It's a man is active and the woman is a passive receiver. And gosh, that's boring. And
Yeah.
right. And it's, you can't actually have sex before marriage because having sex is what shows that you're married, and, all those things. And that's it. Like the focus is on the fact that divorce is a problem here because there's an assumption that both partners are going to go off and remarry, and that will be, you will be having an effect. You will be adulterizing on your first marriage. Like that he says this, and that people don't stop to talk about this piece is what I find fascinating, right?
Mm.
He is perpetuating, I've said this 2 times already today, I'm going to say it again, right? He's perpetuating an ancient way of looking at bodies and relationships and sex. And that is, I'm not okay with that, right? I even just toyed with, like, should I ask Derek, do he and Ryan think that they own each other?
No.
Right?
Yeah, no. I mean, we have a very close bond. We're
Right.
dependent on each other, but no, we don't. Not at all.
Right? I mean,
That doesn't mean you don't have like certain things that you give each other that, like, hey, if you have any insecurity issues that ever come up or anything, you have all rights to be able to help your own mind in those situations. Because we've been together 17 years, and
right.
in my younger years, I wasn't as mature today as I was
Right.
today. You know what I mean?
Right.
So.
Yeah. So all these things. Okay. So then let's get on to the eunuchs. Okay. So, and then he goes on. So he says, he drops this, like, and I tell you, if you divorce and remarry, you're committing adultery. Like that's just don't do it. Right. So is this a positive about marriage? I don't think so. But I'm not sure that he's trying to say something positive about marriage. Right. And then his disciples hear this comment about divorcing and remarrying is committing adultery. And their response is, if such is the case of a man with his woman, my English has wife, it is better not to marry. And he does not talk them off their ledge. He actually changes the conversation. So again, he is suggesting by his silence that it might be better not to marry to begin with. Strike number 4 or 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he lays down this thing, this really fascinating and bizarre teaching, right? But he said to them, not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. And there's a debate. Is that comment about what they were just talking about, or is that comment about what's coming? And my sense is it's what's about to be laid down, because blah, 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 blah. I mean, I have reasons for that, but I don't want, it's what he's about to say. For there are eunuchs who've been so from birth. Some people are born this way, right? There are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. So there are a couple things to point out here. One is most people today, within Christian traditions at least, have been taught to think that he's talking about celibacy, which is hilarious when you read about eunuchs in the first century. But it was a choice made by a bishop in the 4th century to start looking at this passage about eunuchs as meaning that Jesus is endorsing celibacy. Okay, so no, that's not what he's endorsing. Now, whether or not he's endorsing all of the actions of eunuchs, I don't know. But a eunuch in the 1st century and long before and long after was known to be, active with both men and women sexually. I've had so many people in the last few weeks kind of yell at me in the comments that, no, they were just bottoms. No, they're not. They're not having sex. Think about it. I'm like, oh, I have. I've spent lots of time thinking about eunuchs and sex. And the fact that, guess what, folks? Throughout history, elite women of some means, preferred to having sex with eunuchs because the automatic birth control, right? A man who is castrated after puberty many can still get an erection. And also the other piece that I just think is hilarious about this is, since he doesn't have his testes, he's not having sex. I'm like, okay, how do you define sex? Because it's more than just penis and vagina, right?
Right.
Like, this is so, like, heteronormative, of course, but it is so, everybody is showing their cards on how boring their sex lives are. Right? If you think that you know what I mean? Like, no, there's all kinds of sensuality that's a part of this too. And there's all kinds of things that are goodness, people. And so the fact that people are so worked up over this thing, they're worked up over the wrong thing, it seems to me. Eunuchs were known to be sexually active with men and women. Just sit with that for a minute, right? Eunuchs were talked about in ways that, there are even texts that refer to them as a third gender in the Latin. They were talked about in really rude and awful ways. And so we know they are people on the outskirts of their society, right? So there are so many things about this that Jesus is embracing. It's almost as if eunuchs were even more, outcast than the tax collectors and sex workers, right? So he's embracing human beings, some who've chosen to do this to themselves. So we could raise questions about, like, what that tells us about ancient people, about people throughout the ages who have wanted to change their body, right? This is a thing. If it's a thing now, it's always been a thing, right? But, oh, damn it, I lost my train of thought again.
That's so true, dude. That's so true.
Right? Yeah.
You lost your train of thought.
I did.
It's
I do
okay.
this every now and then. I get all excited, and then I'm like,
yeah.
Let's talk about this. Yeah.
Well, I like what you're saying. Just to make a comment about that, we see a trend throughout the Gospels that Jesus always goes to the less fortunate, to the ostracized, to those who are kind of seen as, like, keep them away from the rest of us. They're not us. People with leprosy, like women, poor, slaves. Obviously people with illnesses, and then here we are with this group that's being favored over a normal, as they would call it, man and woman being married in this typical ancestral custom that he has been passed down. And here he is saying, I get that, I'm not changing that because you guys wouldn't accept my teachings if I just said shit on this whole marriage thing.
Right.
But these guys here, the eunuchs, they're on the right track. And you should try, if you can handle it, you should be like these eunuchs, whether you became one, whether you were born one, or and this, I think, is why Origin, as far as I'm aware, did cut the package. And
Derek, he did. Origin did. But here's the thing. The practice of self-castration was so popular that the very first thing that the Council of Nicaea weighed in on was on that issue. Like, I grew up in a church that said one of either the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed every Sunday. I know what the Nicene Creed says, but it doesn't say anything. I've never said anything about castration. Yeah, the very first decision they made was that if you have self-castrated, right, you do not get to be a leader in the church. Like, it was that popular. Enough men were doing it that these guys felt like they needed to weigh in on it. So
Wow.
they're not taking it as a joke. They're not taking it as hyperbole. Men were taking this very seriously,
Mm.
very literally. And so
I
what does it say that Jesus is embracing somebody who is non-binary gender-wise, who is potentially quite adept at sex in lots of ways with men and women, and he's not saying there's anything wrong with that. Like, he's embracing these people. What does that say?
I mean, look, someone might get really, really all butthurt about what you just said and go, "Well, give me the proof that they were messing with these people." And of course, your article, I imagine,
Yes,
goes
that's
into
why I
some of
make
this.
yes, that's why I make it available. Mhm.
But I do want to mention one thing,
Yeah.
and I try to get my mom to think outside of the old school box.
Okay.
She's so
Yep.
used to the way things have always been, and I try to address and have her think
Sure.
outside of it. And then I point out, some people think that this type of sex that you think is normal is actually gross. They think that, and well, they're gross. And I'm like, oh, so it's your opinion versus their opinion.
Exactly.
My point is we have examples of Jesus going to women who, have done things according to the story. They're being what was the we call her the sinning woman, that he forgives her sins, and like he doesn't say anything like corrective in that passage. From what I understand, he just forgives her sins for that what she did. I could be mistaken. I'd have to reread it. I think it's in John chapter
Are you
8.
talking about John chapter 8? Yeah, he actually
Yeah.
does say, "Go and sin no more."
Okay, is
And
that okay?
no, I like to take issue with that whole thing because
Right,
who said that she was sinning to begin with? Um, right? I mean,
right,
we don't know the scenario. Like, of course, according to their ways of thinking about things, but their way of thinking about things is really messed up. It's very judgmental and it is very negative about sex. And sex is only for a particular place and time. Like, this is, I'm sorry, that is really, really not the only way to look at that
right.
about bodies and sex. And if she's a sex worker, how is she going to stop? Like, if that's how she's supporting herself and he tells her to go sin no more, like, and I want to tell him to fuck off. Like, no, this is not the right way to handle any of this, right? You didn't apologize to her for the way they brought her in front of a whole temple full of men and stood her in front of everybody and said, look, what should we do with her? Like, you didn't apologize to her for that. The way she was used as a pawn in this whole situation, like, I feel like, okay, Jesus had a nice thing to say. He doesn't judge her or he forgives her. That's nice, but that's not enough.
Right. I love how you just undermine the whole thing and have us challenge the entire idea. And it makes me wonder, hypothetically, I think it's a narrative. I don't know if there's any historical memory to that at all, but it makes me think, like, if we want to play the hypotheticals, how many of these men were sleeping with her, right?
Exactly.
Who are then turning around going, oh, yeah, look at this woman who's,
Right.
they're not frowned upon again. But
Exactly.
as far as the eunuchs go, I had a question
Yeah.
that it's kind of a hypothetical here. Do you think this eunuch idea is being brought up based on asceticism in a philosophical sense, apocalypticism in some way? Like, hey, neither are going to be given and taken in marriage because in the resurrection, sorry, because it's like we're all going to be gods. You have this very strange idea of becoming the bride of Christ. And I, as this alpha patriarchal man growing up and young, newlywed and all that in my Bible, kept reading these passages about I'm going to be Christ's bride. Here I am, this man.
Right.
How the hell am I going to be Jesus's wife? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. I'm the man, like I'm just
good.
expressing.
No, that's good. I'm glad you thought that. You
What's
should.
going on with this?
Yeah,
I never
you should.
understood it.
No, you should. I mean, I'm glad that you did. It does. Paul says it, and they say it's implied in Revelation that he's going to marry either the city of Jerusalem, that has the new city of Jerusalem, just descended from the heavens, or the 144,000 male virgins. Take your pick. Yep. Mm-hmm. Right. That's in there. Like, that's biblical. Like,
Right.
I'm not a fan of apocalyptic literature. The book of Revelation is my least favorite, probably, book in the Bible. But like, why are we not taking this more seriously? And your point about being the bride of Christ, right? The church has historically only allowed men, right, to be the head of the church. And so if the church is married to Christ,
Isn't
we've
that
got a
man with
male
man?
thing going there. Yeah.
Right. So, and yet he's identifying her as his bride.
Yeah.
So
It's all kinds of. All
So
kinds of confusing. Go ahead.
yeah, but just eunuchs again is do you have a particular leaning of like maybe it's a mixture of both? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Essentially, why does he bring up eunuchs right now, and in
Right.
which way do we make sense of it? I like your question. I think it's a good question to ask. I really honestly have not figured out what I
Right.
think of that because it's like it comes out of nowhere. And it's Matthew. I mean, Matthew's kind of late, like all the things about it. Like, what? There is something more to this, right? I do think the question about asceticism is appropriate. Like, I think that's a good place to start in terms of this kind of practice was happening in certain groups. It's not like this was a new thing, right? It's not like this is all of a sudden happening. Like we have records of people treating men this way for centuries before Jesus hits the scene, right? So but I don't know why I just haven't decided what I want, how to make sense of it. I'm and the I think that's because I am more as a biblical scholar, I'm more interested in just let's be very honest about what is being said,
Mm,
because so many people base their lives, they think, on what the Bible says. And so, in a sense, I don't really care how it got there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I just want to talk about it. But I think it's a helpful thing to ask and to look into, where did this come from?
So another way of putting it is that we don't. Well, let's just assume we aren't sure. Asceticism, apocalypticism, or in some way there's a mingling. One or the other might be true. The point is, we have some we can identify what a eunuch is, contextualize a eunuch, understand that this is definitely an unorthodox position. Even to Jesus's Jewish following and disciples, they're shocked. What the hell is this, man? What do you mean? What do you mean about marriage
Yep.
in light of the debate of the day from
Right.
Hillel to Shammai?
Right.
And then here he is going, I'm going beyond these
Yep.
guys. I'm saying eunuchs are the way to go. These are
Yep.
the best. And so you're not even necessarily saying with certainty that Jesus's eunuchs he's describing are sexually active necessarily.
Right.
You are saying contextualizing eunuchs in that period. When you do, you find out they were sexually active, even with their junk half cut off or
Mhm.
completely gone.
Right.
They were active
They were adept. Mhm.
with other people.
That's the word that's used. Yes, they were
Okay.
adept. Yeah. Whether or not all eunuchs were, but some were, right? That's the
Right.
thing. Some were. And there are reasons. There are lots of reasons to I think to see why that would be the case, right? These outcast people. Who do you turn to when you need a little something something, right? If you're not married or whatever. Like the fact that there are sex workers out there makes me think this makes perfect sense to me, that someone
Mhm.
who is ostracized in society in that kind of a way. I mean, the things that are said about them and are just so negative and unpleasant and cruel. And there are, it's not just here or there. There are stories, there are stereotypes, there are aphorisms, there are sayings, there are like all kinds of these people show up as characters in all kinds of ways in the ancient world, in the writings. So they were prevalent enough, right? And known and to be this state. So, it's kind of a fascinating thing to me to think that I think, I think I have to, if I were to try to make a stand, I would say it's more about apocalypticism, right? That we're not going to be around long enough to have many more children anyway. I don't know.
I like what you just said there, and I need to ask you just to clarify. We've been talking about sex
Okay.
as a context for marriage. What does sex usually involve in their mindset based on the literature? Reproduction. They're all about children, carrying on the seed, be fruitful and multiply, these kind of concepts. Is that a correct assessment? And then when you have eunuchs, you clearly have someone not fertile, cannot reproduce, because the man, quote unquote, is always the one who is producing the children based on the text, which is kind of nuts to think about. But
Mhm.
I mean, obviously we play a role, but like they act like we're carrying the damn baby. So anyway,
They do. They tended to think of it that way, that the semen was just a little baby that just needed to grow.
right.
Yep.
I'm the one with the baby,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yep.
just putting him in the oven
That's right.
to microwave him for 9 months, and
That's
then
right.
he's gonna come out hot and ready. So
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
Was there a question in there that or something I need to respond to? Because I
You
think
answered it. I just was
yeah.
saying
Yeah.
sex is so marriage, right? We have to think as sex, but when we think of sex, we should think of reproduction, I
Right.
imagine.
Right.
So you have this linear idea that reproduction is the utility of marriage in a way.
Yes.
In
Yeah.
their mind.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is why to talk about a eunuch in the context of divorce or marriage or whatever is like, what? Like he just went entirely a different direction and then embraces them and says, whoever can accept this, let anyone accept this who can. I mean, basically, I just kind of love it. I just kind of love that it's in there, right? This isn't taken seriously at all.
Right.
I remember having a conversation with someone like 6 years ago or so. He's very conservative, evangelical, and we were talking about biblical marriage, and we're talking about this thing. And I said, "Well, so and so, well, what about Jesus' comments about eunuchs?" And he physically shook, like it was too. I can't talk about that. Like it was just, no, we can't go there. I'm like, so you're telling me that verses 4, 5, and 6 are essential for you, but 5 verses later, not so much? Like, I don't.
Right.
Can we talk about that? Yeah. Okay, I think
Very
I'm done
true.
with my slideshow.
Okay.
I'm gonna.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm removed from this. So anyway, so that's the. Why do I care that Jesus talks about eunuchs? I care because I think it's really interesting. And I don't know if he actually said that thing about eunuchs,
Right.
but it's put in there. And then let's talk about what that means then, right? In the first century, that means he's embracing a non-binary person who couldn't reproduce, which is one of the defining elements of biblical marriage, according to most people, right? Reproduce. And they can't. And Jesus is upholding that kind of a guy in the middle of one of the like there are 4 passages, right, that people turn to define biblical marriage, and at the end of the third one, Jesus undermines the whole thing, right? Like, am I making sense?
Yes.
The four passages for people who don't know or would like to know: Genesis 1:28, Genesis 2:24, Matthew 19:4-6, and Ephesians 5:31 and 32. Those are the passages that people say define biblical marriage if a person uses that phrase. And at the end of that passage, Matthew 19, right, Jesus undermines the first one, right? Genesis 1:28 says, "Be fruitful and multiply," and Jesus is upholding eunuchs who cannot be fruitful or multiply. Like, can we just talk about that?
Or think it through. Just think it through a little bit. It might shock you to go, why? And then you might have questions. You might have you might draw something like, he did believe the end was going to happen soon. That raises other problems for those who still think the future something's going to happen, which I've, again, do I need to go down this path of failed apocalyptic expectation? And then the other is, if it's ascetic and it's based on philosophy, if we just granted that for the sake of it, because I think there is a sense in which the early church has this notion, and to combat that, you get these forged letters in the name of Paul, I imagine, because I think I imagine Paul was a be fruitful and multiply guy, but tomorrow Jesus is coming back. So don't worry about it kind of thing. I don't know, but they put into his mouth, women, you're a baby making machine, as you well know. In order to be saved, you need to have kids. What about the ladies who can't have children?
Exactly.
So there's so many questions that you have to ask. And if you ask those questions, you might soften up your contemporaneous views about current events and current people. In fact, I guess another way to paint it to you, Dr. Bird, help me if I'm on the right track. If Jesus were here today, who would he be hanging out with? Who would he be trying to defend, and who would he be wanting to probably help in light of? Now, I know there are other factors based on his antiquity and morals, but scratch the fact that he's a Jew in this region of the world 2,000 years ago who has, you get my point though, like Like,
do, but yeah, I think I do.
okay, so he's in the conservative camp and he's ruffling feathers with them, and he's going, actually, you guys, no, we're going to need to be more liberal about some of these things. In fact, I mean, in a sense, you could argue in some ways he's doing that. Not completely slavery, not quite.
And he's right, and at the same time, and earlier he's endorsed this view of marriage, right? That perpetuates women seeing and valuing women as objects, right? Because that's what the sex thing is. Like, that part really is unsettling to me. Biblically speaking, the way sex is talked about, it is an action that a man does to another person, primarily women, but also enslaved peoples. That is just so unsettling to me, and that is still in the air. It's in the ethos that we're seeing Jesus replicate, talk about, and he's not challenging that.
You mean
right?
he doesn't have some form of omniscience? I'm teasing.
I know you're teasing, and I certainly used to think that way for sure, right? Like,
other than the day or hour, he knows everything except the day and hour that the Son of Man will come. Yeah, but he obviously isn't aware of this. This brings other questions, and I think that this was implied. And getting your thoughts before we go to Q&A, if that's okay with you, is we should stop going to Jesus for I think this is like the implied conclusion. Stop going to Jesus's teachings as if they are the go-to for all. Yeah, like, we can find good things there. You highlight some of these discussions are even already prevalent before him in other figures. Cool, but then, like, let's be objective and look at him and go, yeah, that wasn't a smart. That's wrong. Nope. What about the woman? He's not thinking about this, according to the text.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are two different ways that I tend to think about this. When people say something like, okay, sex between same-sex marriage is not allowed because it's not in the Bible. I'm like, well, that is a true statement, but neither is a marriage based upon two equals choosing it and based on love. That is not demonstrated anywhere in the Bible either. So are you going to base your whole premise? Are you going to stake your claims on it has to be in the Bible in order for it to be okay today?
Right. There's
that side, right? And then the flip side is, there's more going on in the Bible than you seem to be aware of, right? This is big stuff, in my opinion. And we're not acknowledging that in these conversations about marriage. There are other things going on with Jesus that you and I aren't touching on today, which is I didn't want to, because it's a lot to tackle all at once. And honestly, Derek, I think even for myself, like in my own journey in this life, as I was formerly an evangelist, and then I went to seminary because I wanted to study biblical languages, and then I kind of just progressed in these ways of thinking. And even for me, it was hard to see these things that are being put in Jesus' mouth. It was hard to see some of the other things I talk about, say in chapter 10, only heteros. It was hard for me to see what was actually going on at times. It's hard for me to see Paul mocking Onesimus in his letter to Philemon. He's making fun of him. I mean, you don't have an enslaved person. Sorry, I don't want to get into that. I shouldn't have opened that can of worms. But it's hard for me to see that Paul says things that are actually really harmful or rude, or cruel. That's hard for me to acknowledge, because that guy was important to me for a long time. And even if I'm not tracking with him anymore, it's still hard to change the way I think about that. And so there are things depicted. There are things in the Gospel of John about Jesus that are depicted about him that made me uncomfortable at first to come to terms with. I think that needs to be said, right? Just because I have a different relationship to these texts than I used to, it took me some time to get there. And so one of the things that I think I'm trying to say here is this is a process for people for whom the Bible is or used to be important. It's still a process to work through all these things. But I think it's worth doing because this is a conversation. This is affecting people's lives, right?
Your book, that you described that quite well, because I think that's true for anyone, no matter where you are, no matter what you believe. You may be a Christian watching today who can get behind much of what is said, may not agree with much of what is said.
Right. Right.
You could be someone who's obviously not a Christian, or whatever you are, theist, non-theist, agnostic, doesn't matter where you're at. I think we're all on a journey trying to figure out, trying to get to the answers, be as close to what maybe is the case. I don't know. That's my interest, is what was the context? What did the text imply? But you kind of hold the hand of the reader in this book and kind of take us down through the journey of thinking through these things from various angles. And what is interesting about what you just said about Paul or the Gospel of John describing Jesus in certain ways, or things Jesus said that were offensive or really caught your eyes, that these problems, I'd be interested in the chronology of your experience through that journey, because I did not read these as this patriarchal household man who grew up, traditional home. This is the way things should be. I never read those problems and could even see those problems. The problems for me started with failed apocalyptic expectations. It was different things. And then I kind of worked backwards, I feel, toward what you're saying, and starting to recognize, hold on, Paul's pissed. Paul's angry. Paul, is he a liar? I mean, you even asked the question that the Bible is saying he isn't, because he says, I am not a liar. Well, you start to feel comfortable asking the question, is he lying? I mean, in a modern example, he claims to have revelation, right? Many people have claimed revelation. Ezekiel documents it. Book of Revelation documents these things. People throughout history have documented these things. Someone says they met Tupac or they met Elvis Presley. And guess what? Elvis Presley has a message. And this is a message that he never told the people when he was alive, but he's telling me after his death in his celestial form. And I'm conveying this prophecy, or this revelation that was revealed to me by Elvis himself, that is different, or even contrary to the things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you should trust me. You would pause, but because we were raised or taught, or we had an emotional experience, some psychological experience when we went in that helped us get off drugs, that helped us mend our broken lives, our marriage, financially, we attribute it to something that went positive. As soon as I became a Christian, next thing you know, my life changed, or there's a sense of community. The list goes on and on and on. All of that doesn't matter if we just ignore it. I'm not interested in ignoring these things. I want to look at them and say, human. And once you recognize that, back to my point about the Bible, and you live this life and you're like, well, I have purpose and meaning in my life. You are attributing it to a book, but the book isn't it. You already have those things, and you think it's the book. You think it's that thing. And anyway, sorry. No, that's my little rant, I guess.
Get to do that. Yeah, you're allowed.
I'm allowed to rant every once in a while.
It's your party. You can do what you want.
I seriously always enjoy thinking outside the box of what I'm gonna be aware of. We talk about Revelation. I'll read right past Mystery Babylon, the whore. And I just read right past it. And you're like, did you catch that?
Right,
exactly. Notice she's called a whore. And it's like, why is she called a whore? And
and why is she going to be gang raped and killed?
Right.
And why are we not disturbed by that?
Right.
Yeah.
Or even in, what is it? I think you're talking about the one in Revelation 2 to the church that, or maybe, because I know that it is what's going to happen to Rome. I think Mystery Babylon's Rome. But obviously she's going to get destroyed. And yeah, there is this very grotesque description of her end. And then you go into Revelation 2 about the woman on her sick bed, or really it's just a bed, who men come and lay with her, and her offspring are going to be killed by Jesus. It's not like we're not able to blame Yahweh here. According to this text, it's Jesus. This is in Bart Ehrman's recent
22. In Revelation 22.
Yeah.
So Bart Ehrman brings that up, you said?
Yeah, Bart Ehrman brings it up. Of course, this is like a well-known scholarly position that Jesus is going to kill her children, and then the men are going to get afflictions. It doesn't describe what those afflictions are, and they're going to lay with her. They're going to be wooed into her bed with her, and she is the description. I think Jezebel, They call her Jezebel.
Mhm.
And this church that he's condemning is practicing eating meat sacrificed to idols and fornication in some way, whatever that means.
Thyatira is the city, or the church.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's let's think about that for a second. Let's, you know what I mean? Audience, reader, Christian who values the biblical text. What
Right.
the heck
What
is going on?
what kind of judgment, what kind of thing is being implied here that Jesus is about to do, right? Unleash some sort of punishment on a woman. Actually, someone came. I did a live conversation with my patrons last night for the first time, and someone who came actually asked this question. So we were.
Wow.
I was just talking about it last night. I know your works, your love, faith, service, patient endurance. I know that your last works are greater than the first, but I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet and is teaching and beguiling my servants to practice fornication and to eat food sacrificed to idols. I gave her time to repent, but she refuses to repent of her fornication. Beware. I just want to comment on the fact that we call any kind of sinning is being called fornication.
Right.
Because, right, so the ancient Israelite people were being called a whore. They're being called, they as a people are being depicted as a female and are being judged, and their wrongdoings are being talked about or judged through this negative role within sex. And it's
Right.
like, why do you keep calling them a female in
Mhm.
order to judge, in order to make them embarrass them or whatever? And then also this sexualization of what you deem their wrongdoing to be. So you are calling them a whore because they're worshiping other gods. You are like, God is saying that to God's own people, and we're supposed to want to be God's people after the way he's talking about it. Like, this is, it's abusive relationship 101, but it's throughout the texts. So no
Yeah.
wonder some people have a hard time like seeing the problem.
And it's prevalent in modern society. I think that's the reason why, again, I didn't see the problem. When I read the Bible for the first time when I was in high school, it was my King James Bible because I was a King James onlyist, fundamentalist. I know. But when I read it through and through, when I got to these grotesque or very violent passages, I just hook, line, and sinker bought into the perception of the author because this is divine.
That's right.
So when the author who is divinely inspired by the Holy Spirit writing, God annihilate every man, woman, and child, flood all life on earth, including the animals, except 2 pairs of each kind, yada, yada, yada. You know the story.
Right.
I thought when it said, well, they were wicked in their heart.
Right.
God had every right to do it,
Right.
and it was totally right.
Totally fine.
When he talked about raping Israel, God, in my mind, he had all the right to do so.
Exactly.
It was
Right.
like I had just was wooed into drinking the Kool-Aid and believed everything it said. I didn't question it.
Right. Right.
And over the years, you obviously can tell I am like mainly questioning it and like showing and exposing these flaws and things that I didn't recognize. And it's wild to see that journey go from like full on, I am on the side of this, to hold the hell on. What am I doing? Like, how did I think that was okay? And, why did my mind not see it?
Yeah.
Because if I'd have went to any other book that described Marduk or any other god, I'd be like, these are demons, these are devils, and I already have a category that was not in favor for the horrific things they were doing. Now, if I was not coming at it with that angle and you somehow snuck it into a story, I did this with my mom. Why are you not a Christian anymore? She asked me. I didn't go because Jesus, because the Bible, because I knew that she would block off instantly. I told her a story about Homer's Odyssey and gave her the Odysseus story in a nutshell and described this warrior king, because my dad was a warrior. He retired Green Beret Special Forces. He's like badass of a badass kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he would go to war and we weren't sure if that was the last time we'd see him. And when he'd come back, we cherished every moment we had. Well, Odysseus returns finally after 20 years. The story goes, he's back with the love of his life, Penelope, with all the crazy stories that he had to carry. And my mom's crying. She gave me like 15 minutes to describe and go into it. She's crying by the end of it. I said, this was sacred to the Greeks. This was their religion. This was their everything. And she's like, I could see a little why. It's hard for her to see outside her box.
Of course.
But I did something to take it off of the Bible and Jesus, because
Mhm.
Christians are going to watch this even after this is out, and they're going to turn off.
Mhm.
They're not going to want to hear anything. The first time you laugh about something, the first time you challenge Jesus, the first time you say something about the
Yeah.
text.
Right.
And
Right.
how do we get them to
To take it more
see?
seriously.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, it's a good question. It's a good question. But the thing is, ultimately, a person has to be willing to. A person has to be in a place where they want to have that conversation. And then it's all then, yeah, sure. I think it's also important, as you're alluding to have the conversation carefully. I think it still needs to be a careful conversation.
Yeah.
Respectful, and one step at a time, one bite at a time, you know?
Well put. Yeah. Be patient with them. I mean, somehow I used to fight guys like me and be like, oh, you're wrong. And Jesus and God. And
Right, right. When all you're doing is trying to defend what you believe, right? Then you're not in a place to hear anything, and that's okay. Like that's we're all doing this thing the best we can, I think, for the most part. And
I love that. That is so good. I'm ready for super chats if you
Let's
are.
do
If
it.
there's anything we didn't cover,
I mean, there's so much. Wait, there's one thing I wanted to clarify, by the way. This was totally random, but you kind of were throwing some things out there, and then you moved on, and so it didn't matter. But I wanted to comment just very briefly. You
please.
referenced women when you were talking about women, producing children and blah blah blah, and then you referenced the passage in First Timothy where it says that women will be saved through childbirth. That's a physical, literal being spared execution, not Jesus saving your soul. So when they make that comment, and that is in the context of First Timothy is written to Timothy, and he lived in Ephesus, and he went back and forth between Ephesus and Crete. And so anyway, long story short to this, but the point is, when they made that comment, they're talking about the fact that the followers of Christ were being arrested. They were suspect because, for all these various reasons. And part of the solution here is to make sure that women are not choosing not to marry, and that they are producing the babies that they're supposed to produce we need to support empire, and we need soldiers and all that stuff. So it's actually a physical safety issue, not eternal salvation.
What did they? Sorry to interrupt. What did they benefit by reproducing children? Was it like the law would skip over them? Hey, this is a pregnant woman. We can't kill her, or what is the physical?
Well, it goes into a lot of different things, but part of it is, that that idea that comes from Paul about he wishes all were as he was, which is single.
Right.
That grew. That was a kernel and a seed that grew. And so you have this element of early Christian writing that talks about women. So this is where the story, the Acts of Paul and Thecla come into the story, into view. That there's a story about a woman who chooses not to marry, even though she was supposed to, and she has a fiance, and she specifically chooses to just never see him again. And they blame it in the story. They blame it on Paul coming to town and saying his crazy things about relationships and abstaining or whatever. And so she makes a choice for herself. I'm not going to marry. And her own mother says to burn her alive, to make a point of her, because we don't want all the women in town making the same choice. You've got to get married and have babies. This is what you're supposed to do. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like an ancient Salem's witch trial, except they're not witches. They're just choosing not to marry.
That's right. No, that's right. They're choosing for themselves what they want to do. And it includes specifically not marrying. Thank you very much. So there's the kernel, I think, of what's going on in that. And this is why I love visiting the site of Ephesus, by the way, when I take people on a trip, like a Footsteps of Paul trip, because the town of Ephesus is like all these things come together. The women as leaders, and then I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority. That all comes together in Ephesus. It's really fun. Anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was the thing that I needed. Okay. Yes.
That was a
let's
good
do some
point,
Q&A.
though. I
Yeah, okay.
did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, so fun. So fun. Yep.
Just
do it.
shouting out the previous ones again. Jay, thank you so much for the super chats. Again, thank you for both. And Jay-Z, long live the Diablo critics.
Oh, thank you. That was fun. Did you know about that, Derek?
Yeah,
The Diablo critics. Yeah, started last week.
The panel. I was actually in the chat a little bit.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole panel's amazing. Go over there and, of course, subscribe to Jennifer Bird. She's here on the channel, her YouTube channel. She's growing that presence. Go show her love, support. You do streams quite often, so I hope people will go and participate. How many?
Once a week on Thursdays. Yeah.
Perfect. Go subscribe to her channel. That's in the description. And this it's on Kip Davis's YouTube channel.
Diablo critics.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, he explained the name. No, well, it's kind of a random name, and he explains it. We explain it at the beginning of the first, session if you're curious about what that name means. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
JC, how much of Paul's dysfunctions does Dr. Bird think are grafted onto any core of historic, zealous, pro-family Galilean Jesus in the gospel literature?
Fantastic question. I'm like, wait, I need 5 minutes to dissect this question. How much of Paul's dysfunctions do I think are grafted on to any core, historic, zealous, pro-family?
Another way to put it is, Paul, we know chronologically the letters of Paul are supposed to be earlier than the Gospels. I imagine, I think JC's asking, and if I have the question correct, is how much of Paul's teachings and ideas on these issues are actually coming out of the mouth of Jesus in the Gospels?
Thank you for that clarification. That makes sense with that question. Yeah, I think that's probably.
Or maybe what do they have in common? Maybe if what does it look like that Paul and Jesus have in common on this? I imagine.
Well, I just want to clarify something. I don't think that we get a pro-family Jesus in the Gospels. So I want to be clear about that. I think that we don't have a pro-family Jesus in the Gospels.
Right.
I'm going to say it again. So that's important, actually, to note, especially for people who tout biblical values and family values. So that aside, so how much do I think what we're seeing being put in Jesus's mouth is actually coming from Paul? That's a fun question. And I'm not sure I have a very interesting response on the spot.
It's a complicated one too, like to try and.
Yeah, it is, right, because what Paul is certainly very apocalyptic at the beginning, and then when you get to the latest pseudonymously attributed to him, they're very not apocalyptic, just like the Gospels start off very apocalyptic and then lose that. So I'm just trying to think, well, what is Paul's take on family? Like, his take is he doesn't talk about it much. And then what does he say in 1 Corinthians? He talks about he thinks people should just stay as they are, whatever it is, and not seek to get married, and then not seek to, so pretty negative. Is that a function of these apocalyptic Jewish guys in the first century? Like, that's just the way they're thinking, is this has got to come to an end soon, and God's going to come down and destroy our enemies and set things right again. And so doesn't matter.
Right.
I don't know. But what I do think is fascinating is that it is never a thing that Jesus is depicted talking about. I'm going to keep saying these things because I think it's important. I don't think people sit with that. Jesus does not talk positive, doesn't have positive things to say about marriage. Can we just, and regardless of where it comes from, but here's the thing about Paul and Jesus. Gosh, that's a big thing to tackle. The difference between Paul and then what we see in terms of Jesus, the depiction of Jesus. Gosh, I don't know how to answer this one.
Yeah, I feel like it's a complex, and like there's gonna be every scholar's gonna have a different opinion
Right.
on
I was
something.
thinking that too.
Like,
And
yeah,
there's a whole conversation going on here about the origins of this movement and the variety of movements that from the get-go, right? That this
right.
sect of Judaism that became that was called the way, that became Christianity, like blah, 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 blah. The gospel
Thank you.
writers are trying to manage what Paul's ideas, and they start taking off. And what do we do with that? I don't know.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Gettysburg Demoniac
Oh, thank
just ordered
you.
your book. Can't
Awesome.
wait to read it.
Thank you. And I am starting the audio for it, by the way.
I was gonna ask you about that because I
Yeah.
was like, it'd be so much. I go to the gym every morning, and it'd be cool to listen to it and go,
I
oh,
know that a
okay.
lot of people actually prefer that. So yeah, that's why I'm working on it.
Stay
Oh,
tuned and get the
thank you.
book, of
Thank
course.
you.
Thank you. Ted Gimberling, forgive me if I butchered that. Thank you for the super chat, my
You're welcome.
friend. And they also did another one. They said, and thank you for that. What
Mhm.
about Paul saying a man can become one flesh with a prostitute in
Mhm.
1 Corinthians 6:15-16?
Yes. What? Oh, shoot, Ted. I'm so sorry. What is it you were getting at with the question? What about Paul saying that? He is saying that, right? He is reflecting this idea of becoming one, so that, yes, when he is saying, right, like his scriptures have taught him to think, that when two people have sex, they become one. And so that's that's one way of looking at things, I think, right? I don't think it's the only way of looking at this act of having sex, two people coming together for some pleasure and some whatever. I don't think that's the only way to look at it, but it is. You're right. He is saying that here. Does that mean that he's saying something positive about marriage? Not necessarily, right?
Right.
He is trying to protect it, perhaps. Sure, we could say that. He is judging a particular kind of interaction. It's always fascinating to me also to note that Paul claims to have never, to be celibate, and yet he's sitting here passing judgment on other people's sexual activity. I find that really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's
There's a lot.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say there's a lot in that passage. I was just briefly reading it.
Yeah, it's a heavy
There's
one.
a lot. It's kind of makes me think Paul's thinking of a different kind of family, so to speak. It's not like you were just describing, it's not what we think of as family,
Right.
In the physical sense. It sounds almost a spiritual body,
Yep.
but there's a sense in which if you unite yourself with a prostitute, that your body and our bodies becoming tainted.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying there. Yeah, the community is going to be tainted by that joining
Right.
that you're bringing into our midst or whatever.
Which might fit the previous super chat of saying, when Jesus talks about, they're like, your mother and your brother, and who is my mother and my brother? It's you, which is not them, the physical, actual, genealogical. It's, in a sense, it's you, the family, the community, the body here of believers in some way. I wonder, and I'm just throwing it out there, I don't know, but it makes me wonder if that ties into Paul's idea of a family, the family of God, in some weird spiritual sense. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think those are overlapping ideas that they share or whatever, right? Did Jesus also speak that way on his own? Does that come from a Jewish framework?
Right.
Where does that come from? Because they are both talking about it to a certain degree. Yeah,
Right.
that the family of God, or the people who are doing the work of God that I define, that I'm doing over here, this guy Jesus, right? He's leading a grassroots movement, or trying to challenge or denounce the exploitation of the people by their own leaders, right? He's doing that, and there are others who are getting on board with that, and he's calling that doing the work of God. So that's addressing the injustices. So you're bringing about the the kingdom of God by doing this, by addressing. I think that's interesting, and that's what people are related to each other in that community differently than our initial families.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway. I don't know if there's any
that.
overlap, actual connection in that sense, but I do like what you're saying. The real the real family is not the actual mom and the brother.
Right.
It's something more. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's interesting. Victor Engelman, Zeus split divine beings into men and women. Are Agdistis, Hermaphroditus, etc., based on deified actual hermaphrodites closer to the divine form? Could Jesus' opinion on eunuchs be connected?
So, so I think what we're talking about is the Zeus. It also comes up. I love that in the symposium, right, where the men are talking about what is love. What is love? And one of them talks about this idea of people started out with two heads and four arms and four legs and back to back, and the gods separated them, and so we spend our lives finding our other half, right? And so some are man, some are woman, some are man,
Right.
So is Jesus' opinion on eunuchs connected to this idea? My response to this is going to be just basically no, because I don't think eunuchs are non-binary in that kind of a way. Right, because a eunuch is a person, right, who, depending at what point in life they've lost the gonads, they take on what we call, right, we define things as effeminate or whatever, but it's, tends to be this part of humanity. And so they have parts from both, and it's not the same thing. That's a very interesting question, though, because I wouldn't have gone there. But I don't think of it that way, I guess, is my point. And I don't know I'm not sure that that's where to go in terms of maybe the source or inspiration for Jesus on that.
Thank you, Victor. Appreciate the super chat.
Mm-hmm.
Igor, I'm not going to butcher your last name. Thank you for the super chat.
Yeah.
Secret spiritual gospel of Mark recently got much more likely considered to be authentic. Would you be surprised? And what is your opinion?
Igor has been emailing me about his recent writings. So Secret Spiritual Gospel of Mark recently got more. I don't have an opinion on this, to be honest.
Right.
I haven't looked into it. It's not on my list of my to-do list of where I'm going to spend my time. I am a materialist biblical scholar. I care about what people are doing, what's in the Bible, and I care about helping people get beyond harmful engagements with the Bible, harming themselves and others with the Bible. That's where my time and my interest is. So I don't have a thought on that. Would I be surprised if there's a new gospel that we discover? I would be. I would be surprised. I would question its authenticity initially. Like, that would just be my first thought. Like, really now? Okay, interesting. And I'm open. That would be my response. Like, if I had time to look into it, I would, but
I get it.
How's
Thank
that?
you. I do know, and it's been a minute since I've read any of that gospel, and I think we're talking about Morton Smith's going into Morton Smith's work a little bit here, but I know that it seems very controversial kind of material, again, back on Jesus, that would maybe fit that book you recommended about the beloved disciple and Jesus. So it'd be cool. It might open up different ideas about Jesus and what the heck is going on with these single men running around without family and kids being discussed. Both Paul and Jesus might be red flags to consider, my poor, hardcore, staunch conservatives may not like that. You know what I mean? So, anyway.
It's true. And why, and also the side of why is it that so many people think that being married is essential to being a Christian when the two guys that got us started were not?
As far as we're aware, right? Right? There's no reason
as far as we're aware. Yes.
Right.
It's a fascinating leap.
Yeah. He's all about that nuclear family. Hallelujah. Thank you.
Quiverful.
Thank you for the super chat. Gay Jesus in the house.
That's fun.
Good to see you. Thank you so much. I appreciate the love. Paul's Law. Forgive me if I butcher that.
That's how I would pronounce it.
If the woman brought to Jesus Christ to be condemned, I'm just trying to read this, I think, the way it's,
Sure. Yeah.
she wouldn't be an adulterer if she is an unmarried whore. I think she is pulled off the street to challenge on a point of law. He risked making them formally accuse her, and they could not. And then they write, Christian marriage equals God as dad, church equals bad stepdad. So I'm going to bring this one back up because this one actually, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is this is an interesting observation, debate to point out. So, right, in John 8, is this woman, is she married, and are the two that are caught in adultery, whether it's at 8 a.m, as it kind of sounds to me, or whether it's in the past, like maybe 2 weeks ago, we caught her and this other guy in the act of adultery. Should we stone her or not? The question is the fact that this is raised, the question is raised. We caught her in the act of adultery. Okay, aside from the fact the guy should also be there, so that's whatever. What that means is that she is married. She is in a relationship because he is having sex with her and it's being called adultery. She already belongs to someone else. So there's actually a debate about this as well. Like, by the 1st century, do we have it so let me back up. In the Hebrew Bible, adultery is when a man, regardless of his marital status, when a man has sex with someone else's woman, someone else's property. That's adultery. And that is, the issue is her uterus, right? That is the issue. The inheritance, who's the papa, like, well, I'll make sure I'm giving my inheritance to my kid. All kinds of fun things there. So, but then, as I talk about in the book, it's all essentialized around the woman's vagina as access to the uterus, right? So adultery in the Hebrew Bible is about protecting inheritance issues, but it all comes out in this very negative way towards women, right? The double standard piece. Okay, so by the time we get to Jesus, is it possible that that adultery can be if the man is the one who's married and she is, and whether or not she, like, can it be both? Can it go either way? I'm not talking very clearly right now. So the question is, has it evolved to be kind of equal? And I don't know that it has. I don't know that, but
I mean, it sounds like based on your work and others that no, it hasn't. I mean, it's still
right.
Even if there may be upgrades 2.0, 3.0
right. Exactly.
in some way,
right.
the model is the man is the key major player, the one in control, and has the advantage in many ways over the woman.
Right.
Still, she's property still at this time.
Right. And so I'm trying to address, again, I'm trying to come back to the question, but so if she was an unmarried sex worker, I'd rather call it that. And I understand it's probably for length reasons.
I appreciate it though. Yeah.
Yeah. But if she's unmarried and a sex worker, then it isn't an issue of adultery at all. So you think that they're bringing her in to do that, what's interesting is, there's, again, okay, well, this is a story that shows up in 3 different places in ancient manuscripts. So it was an important story. It's in Luke in two of those cases. So the story says, teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say? So yes, they are trying to make a point about the law, but I'm not sure that we can assume that it wasn't actually a case of adultery in their view of things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. How do we know that?
Right.
Exactly the details. Plus, I think it's a literary thing. I'm not going to say there weren't examples of this potentially. It's just, I think this carries more of there's more theological meaning behind this, and about Jesus showing mercy where Moses doesn't. And there's other things we could probably read into that and see what's going on from that. Mm-hmm. But I find it interesting, again, where are the men on trial? Is there any examples anywhere in any of this literature of the man who did these deeds, and then they're all gathering around. No, what the heck? So these are observations you and other scholars like you make me consider, think about, and of course realize why I don't go to my Bible for how I want to function in modern society, how I want to treat my wife, how I want to view the world. No, and I'm not trying to judge them for then. I get it.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Oh,
Like,
totally. I try to do that as well. Like, make it clear. I'm like, I'm just talking about what they are doing, right?
right.
And that is what was going on, but there's also a better way. There's perhaps a different way, and so we don't have to continue to perpetuate. I feel like maybe we haven't done justice to Paul's law, and I'm sorry about that, Paul. But he risked making them formally accuse her, and they could not. That's not entirely how I see that, but I hear what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Oh, they added the accusers could not be liars.
Well, they could. They absolutely could. I think that's an important way to actually reread it. I mean, how do you catch people in the act of adultery at 8 a.m, unless you're plotting something? Or, I had someone point out to me, actually online student point out to me that, like, well, it actually could have been, they knew that she'd been accused of it 2 weeks earlier or whatever. The whole thing could be a scam, a setup, right? I mean,
right.
And we know that actually does happen and has happened and continues to happen in countries where this is still a thing, right? The Stoning of Sororia K is a movie I recommend to people on that. Like, a man can accuse his woman of stepping out on him just to get rid of her.
Right. That's exactly what they brought up before, is they could have been lying about her. So how sad of a situation when society works in such a way, singling out the woman on these particular things, where he could find any reason he doesn't like her anymore, or someone doesn't like her. There are examples we can even use today, potentially, where people are accusing others that didn't do anything or something, and then they get screwed over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their reputation is ruined, their careers, whatever, right?
Right.
Yep.
Over something that you would challenge on the outset as it being some punishable thing. It might have consequences with the relationship they have if they're being dishonest and not, there's not an understanding there or whatever. Right. But nothing that is deserving of punishment, nothing that is criminal, nothing that is, and that's where you and I are going to go. The whole damn story is just, if I was omniscient, or at least could see into the future, what we look back now as we've learned a lot and we've come this far, we'd go, wouldn't Jesus have noticed that and been like, Moses was wrong? And I'm telling you today, and had a way of looking this. But of course, Christians who double down on this would say, no, you guys are wrong. And that old set, not all Christians, let's not show them. Yeah, you just want to sin, or actually, there's some who will go so far as to try and uphold slavery, uphold these really archaic ideas that we should be growing out of as humans, because the Bible, because the book says. Yeah.
It's funny. I also don't usually say that Moses wrote the law, but I understand that you're using it as a shorthand. I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah. But notice again, Jesus is wrong again. Moses didn't write oh man, come on. How did Jesus not know this? But Josephus also claims that Moses wrote this.
Of course he did.
Yeah. And Adam and Eve were walking around, and they, they thought this was the case.
Yeah. Well, and this reminds me of the story in John 4, right? The woman who meets him at the well, and she has had 5 spouses, and the one she's living with now is not her own. And I remember growing up, all throughout to my late 20s, like, judging her for her sexual activity. Like, she's had sex with 6 different men, and the one she's living with now she's not married to, and like, I was taught to see it that way. I don't think the story necessarily upholds a judgment on her. And by the way, how is it possible for a woman in the first century to have been in 5 marriages? Someone either died or divorced her. She didn't have any choice in that matter. But interesting
Mm,
how we want to judge her for having had sex with 6 people. Like, what?
right.
What is wrong with us?
Yeah.
She was a
I mean,
victim of that
the
system and of
system.
the patriarchal framework and of the society that she's living in. Anyway,
Yeah, and it's he in a sense is frowning upon it in the context. You know, you could tell he's not like in favor, of course, of that. He has to highlight that. It was like a gotcha, and
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
it's like
And the one you're with now is not your.
right, right. Wow, there's so many
Yeah, there
interesting
are.
things to explore, and from your angle, you're writing great books.
Thank you.
Again, I shamelessly need to plug that so people could see. Your writing is fun. It's super fun and easy.
Thank you.
It's I don't know, like it just keeps going. You want to keep reading. It's not like you're laboring over the top to try and bring some heavy scholarly like analysis that's going to make your brain hurt. It's just very easy to read and fun to
Thank you.
do.
Thank you.
I yeah, I appreciate it. I really do. I love this book. I hope more people will get it. In fact, I'm curious to know, has anyone other than the super chatter uh, went and purchased a copy of this book? I'd like to see a show of hands of anybody in the chat who has. Makes me feel good to know that the scholars I bring on are getting their works read. And listen, you don't have to agree with,
Exactly.
you know, you
Exactly.
can read to
Yeah.
understand where she's coming from. And
Yeah.
then you can make videos debunking it if you want to
What?
spend, you know.
You can.
Yeah,
You can.
yeah,
I might even respond to it.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think the price is an issue for a lot of people, which was really discouraging to me at first. But I think we're at the point where they might be putting it into paperback soon because we've sold enough copies. Just
Oh,
a heads up. I'm not sure how soon though. I asked the editor because we had this conversation, and he's like, "Oh, once we run out of the first print run, then we'll look into paperback." So we're at that point. So hopefully
wow. Oh,
soon.
I hope so. Yeah, let's hope this stream gets her more sales because this invites more academic discussions, more of your questions, more of these back and forth dialogues, and better assessing, paying attention, thinking about what we're reading, all of that. You do a great job with that. And I always enjoy the excitement, enthusiasm that you and I bring. And I hope anyone watching understands that we're just excited. We like to talk about these things. And forgive us if we seem scatterbrained because both you and I do this when we get on. We're like, we bounce
Yeah,
around and do
right.
this.
Yeah, yeah. That comment earlier was like, well, I mean, that comment's right. I do. I get like excited and keep going instead of making a complete sentence, and my thoughts are just doing all the things. And I'm like, trust me, if I'm actually lecturing or whatever, I'm gonna
Yeah.
make a complete sentence.
I
This
get
is
it.
different. This is
Well,
more
you're
fun,
so
right?
comfortable. That's a
Yeah,
good thing. You're
yeah.
being yourself. You're not like, okay. And
Not
then in
uptight about
bullet point number 3,
right.
it says, you know, that you're
Mhm.
just being you and having fun. And I think that we'd be the same way in person. If we were recording in person, as you know, I travel to interview scholars here and there.
Yeah, yeah.
The same vibe, same energy, bouncing around. We're
Yeah.
just having fun. And because there's so much to discuss.
There
And
is. There is
that's
no
what,
loss of things to discuss. Yeah. And I think we touched on this earlier, but I will say, what the reason I chose to do this, Shannon. Oh, that's so fun. Thanks for letting me know, Kit, or letting us know. Thank you. Oh, that's fun. Yay. I
anyway, I'm
appreciate
just
that.
showing
No, I
off.
appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I got into doing this particular topic because of what was happening around me politically.
Right.
And I wanted to just throw that out there because sure, we can talk about like I can have this conversation with students in a classroom or I can do whatever, but like this is a thing. Like there are countries on the planet where it is illegal to be LGBTQ. Like your
Yeah.
identity is illegal. And the reason it is illegal is because people misunderstand human sexuality, and the Bible, the Christian Bible, has significantly contributed to that misunderstanding of human sexuality. That's what's going on, right?
Mhm.
And so our misunderstandings come from the texts themselves being misinformed, and we're taking it as authoritative and as coming straight from God. And so of course it's right? But it isn't. And so that's why I went into this particular project and I worked on it for 10 years.
Right.
Trying to figure out how to have that conversation with people. How do I help someone understand that better? Trying to tried to figure out a way to do that well, and it finally wrote the book. So,
well, for people like me, I don't think I would have been able to swallow this pill as a Christian who's investigating it. But this would have been a pill eventually, as I've come to realize now, that I could consider. But initially, it was other avenues, other things, failed apocalyptic stuff. It was this. It was comparative mythology. So expanding my mind that maybe Jesus isn't the only miracle worker or demon, this or that.
That was mind blowing.
Yeah, like once you start realizing you got competitive models and that those are making claims, and they, in their mind, are believed by their own cult following. Why do I think this one and not that? And those are the things, because for me, I came from that since you were talking about politically, like I came out of the bubble that was very staunch, politically right-wing all the way, and thought many of these categories were weird and strange and not normal and all of that, because normal is God and man, and or God marrying man and woman from the very beginning, Adam and Eve, the whole nine. And then when you start to realize, like, hold on, the entire biblical thing that I had my whole worldview wrapped up in, like I didn't even know what was in my own Bible sometimes, eunuchs, things like that, or that there were problems with this stuff. And once that started to unravel, that's why I don't understand personally, just speaking out loud, people who deconvert or claim to then recognize this stuff, who still hold to very crazy ideas. I'm like, how did you not see that as you're leaving out the door, they have a little metaphorical baggage thing, leave the baggage over here, kind of. I don't get it. For me, I don't get it.
Interesting.
That doesn't mean you don't have to throw everything out. It's just there's so many ideas that I'm like, why is that still not, anyway, I don't want to get into the details because I try to avoid politics as much as I can,
but it does take time, doesn't it, to deconstruct or unpack what you've believed and to let things go and to reconsider. And so all those pieces take time. And that might be part of it, is they don't really have the time, the bandwidth to reconsider some of these things. I don't know. Just saying.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I love you. Thank you so much,
Derek.
Book. Keep me updated. Let me know. It always motivates me and inspires me when I see that people are getting the scholars' works. It drives me, makes me get motivated, and it also makes me feel good. Almost like, when I get that call and they go, thank you, we had a lot more sales. MythVision's audience is fantastic. Just really tells me a lot about what we're doing and the kind of impact and change we're making in terms of helping academics such as yourself to keep going.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for your support and for your friendship. It's been almost 4 years we've been doing this. We forgot to bring that up till now. June 2, 2020 was our first release.
Exactly. Almost 4. Almost 4. Wow.
Yeah.
It's been a minute.
It has. Thank you.
Well, we're gonna have in-person stuff too. I've got ideas, but we'll tackle that.
Sounds good.
I'll be in Florida sometime in July, I think.
Okay.
So I'll be closer to you. You're East Coast now,
I am, Virginia.
Yeah. So you're not too far from me. I'll be down in.
Right.
We'll figure something out. So.
Okay.
Any final words from you for our audience? Someone out there might be struggling. I always like to give a chance for like an encouraging word from you or anything that you'd like to say.
Yeah, it's hard to be encouraging on this one. I think what I do hear a lot, I do hear people say, gosh, I really did. This passage was I was beaten up by this passage, or I was, and I think part of what I'm trying to do is give people space to be able to call that out and say, this idea is in the Bible and it has been used against you to harm you. And I want better than that for you. So, I guess that's what I'm trying to do in this one. What does the Bible actually say about marriage? There's not a lot that is helpful for us today. And I think it's important to note that. And I think I'm not down on marriage. I have performed 3 and I'm about to perform another one for my cousin, and right. Like I support people in marriages and I want the best for them. Right.
We should have said that at the beginning of the video for those who, but go ahead.
It didn't occur to me until just now.
It's a great point though. I'm glad you did it.
Not down on marriage. Yeah. So
So
anyway,
you're
I
not
think there are
against
others.
it.
No.
But you're obviously trying to open up, broaden
Yeah.
our minds a
Yeah.
little, and then question when someone weaponizes the
Yeah.
Bible
Yeah.
in
With
any way.
that has very ancient ideas about bodies and sex and this relationship we call marriage. Yeah.
Right. So you can cherish that. If anyone was watching this is why I wish we did say it
I
earlier.
know, me too. I
You
didn't
know,
think about it.
for those who are in a marriage like me, who
Mhm.
cherish their partner, who
Yeah.
love them more than
Right.
themselves, that would do anything to protect them, like you're totally for that. You're
Right.
suggesting that, first of all, the way that marriage has been used has not always been at the advantage of the female.
Mhm.
And there's so many things to think that through. So you're not against that. If anything, you'd be for relationships and such. I
Loving.
don't, I don't really. I'm married, but I'm not like, for those who aren't into the institution of marriage or going out of the
Mhm.
way to marry, I
Mhm.
don't blame them at all. Trust me, I get it. Everyone's different. Everyone has
Mhm.
a different,
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
no
Yeah.
knocking you. Anyway, I
Yeah.
don't know why we didn't talk about that earlier,
I know.
but
It did
you're
occur
the
to me.
best.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Do we do our outro? Is that what you're wanting?
Well, it's so fun.
Which one do you want? I've got
Remember the outros as much. I just think they're fun. The scroll I don't know. I don't know. It's been a
the
while since
apocalyptic scroll one.
I do like the scroll, but I don't like apocalypse. So you do
It
whatever.
was, yeah, it was a bit apocalyptic, but it was like
But it's
we're bringing the four horsemen and
yeah,
stuff.
I know. Is that an
we-
outro and not just an intro?
I think I use it for both,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
yeah, but I think I usually do it for an outro. Let me see. I still have it in here. It's been a minute since I've even applied these outros.
See, I didn't know you weren't using them. Okay.
Here it is. I think it is. Yeah, that's the
Let's
new
do it.
one. Yeah, let's do it. All right.
Right.
Well, thank you, everybody. Like the video, share it, get her book. Let me know in the comment section if you got her book. It makes me smile, and I mean that. I'm not even kidding you. It makes me feel good to know that people care about the scholarly work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Son, do you want to
Wrong one.